In a world haunted by mythical monsters, he was supposed to be just another demon banisher who dreamed of living a quiet, normal life. But on one mission, he encounters the legendary divine beast, the Behemoth, who appears not as a world-ending creature, but as a breathtaking woman, calling him her destined groom. Now he's caught between duty and a divine being who insists their fates are bound. What happens when the strongest creature in existence chooses one human? Let's find out. This story began in Berlin, Germany. The protagonist understood that if he had refused that job back then, this would not have happened. Monsters often found in myths and legends are called anomalies. Times have changed, and over the past 10 years, one anomaly after another has begun to appear among people more often. The girl saw this on her phone, dropped it, and ran. There are numerous videos about this topic online. She didn't believe it all, thinking it was some kind of nonsense. Then she remembered that it was a common occult ritual performed for fun. She ran, thinking that monsters don't exist. The girl heard a roar behind her and quietly turned around. She saw a hooded man attack the monster from behind and cut it in half. He defeated the monster and disappeared a few seconds later. The girl looked back but didn't see him. The guy with glasses thanked him for taking on this unexpected challenge. Tojuro put away his weapon and asked if there were any other anomalies in the city. The guy replied with a smile that no more anomalous activity had been detected. Tojuro replied, "Oh, thank goodness." MC loudly and angrily asked if they thought this was a bit much, considering he'd rushed to another country for this mission. He asked what they would have done if he hadn't come. The guy with glasses laughed loudly and said that Tojuro definitely wouldn't have let them down. The protagonist sat down on the floor and sadly expressed how much he wanted to return to his native Japan. The blonde guy told him that he'd dealt with a large number of monsters, more than all of them combined, adding that this was an amazing result for an exorcist, especially at his age, and he should be proud of himself. Tojuro turned around and said that he was disgusted. The guy in glasses asked how he was feeling. The protagonist pressed his weapon to his forehead and sadly said that this anomaly was like his favorite peso. He added that it was some kind of disgusting feeling. The guy looked at him with compassion. The protagonist remembered how it all began. Anomalies, the monster that appeared in their world 10 years ago. Creatures appeared in every corner of the world, and each time they were different. After analyzing the overall picture, they came to the conclusion that these monsters from legend had infiltrated their world. One of the specialists at the global meeting asked, "Is there some serious problem behind this?" The entire room looked at him with bewilderment and condemnation. Someone didn't understand and asked, "Excuse me?" He added that in every country there were people who challenged evil spirits, right? They have existed since time immemorial. He pointed to the leaders of other countries and said that they had theirs too. Every country has such specialists, and if you think about it, they really do exist. The other specialists listened to him dubiously and asked if such a thing even existed. Thus, a global division was created to challenge the unknown. They were called exorcists. But no matter how you look at it, it's just a pretty excuse. Tojuro angrily asked the priest why they couldn't fight monsters with more modern methods. He added that other countries had tons of money to create a new type of weapon against the anomaly, didn't they? The priest closed the Bible and exhaled, answering, "Such is their destiny." He added that wouldn't his ancestors be happy to know that their powers were now helping for the good of all humanity? The protagonist looked at him and asked, were they really enjoying this? But in his head, he understood that exorcists had an unspoken rule, and it stated that, like the monster from legend, they must remain in the shadows. MC saw the girl he saved hug her mother. He realized that it seemed she had finally met the one she was running to. The protagonist, with a disgruntled expression, looked back from the back of the truck, thinking that, in his opinion, it was nothing but hardship. After all, he'd been dragged here and made an exorcist only because his family had been practicing spiritual power for generations. He looked at the crying girl he'd saved and understood that no one would ever know what he had to do to protect someone. The priest folded his hands in front of him, looked at Tojuro, and said he understood perfectly, adding that they were risking their lives and would like to hear words of gratitude. He said in a rough voice, "No, indeed." The priest asked in bewilderment, "Really?" Tojuro said that would be nice, but the most important thing was that he didn't want to live his life taking lives. He clenched his robe in his fist and added that he simply wanted to be free from all this. The exorcists instantly looked at him in bewilderment. The priest looked at him with a smirk and said he understood, but with a little more freedom, he could present himself to that girl as a hero and start a relationship with her, right? The protagonist glared at him and loudly asked if he was even listening to him. The other exorcists began laughing and teasing him, asking why he needed girls when he had them. They said he didn't know how to talk to girls at all and asked him not to leave their male fraternity. He angrily and loudly called them idiots and shut them up. The exorcist in the black hood scratched her chin and said that they constantly praised and encouraged him, saying that he was making an invaluable contribution to the fight against evil spirits. She added that he didn't even appreciate it. The priest folded his hands in front of him and told the boys that they would now discuss their current mission. Everyone turned their attention to him and began to listen attentively. He added that right now their car was heading to the German border. to an ancient town that had become a cultural and historical landmark, quite popular with tourists. An annual festival would be held in the town starting tonight and for several days. The priests said that their group had recorded that a rather powerful anomaly raged in this village every year around this time. The exorcists asked cautiously, "Powerful? And what do they even know about it?" The priest calmly replied that it was known among people as the King of Beasts. He added that the King of Beasts is a legendary monster so tall that you can't even see its face. It also appears in the Old Testament and ranks above other anomalies. The protagonist looked at the priest in surprise, his mouth open. He asked him if they could even overcome such an anomaly. The priest glanced at him and said, "Who knows?" He suggested looking at it from the other side. If they defeated him, only the request of a hero who had made such a huge contribution to the protection of humanity should be heeded as a reward. The priest extended his hand, looked at Tojiro, and said that if he dreamed of an ordinary life and love, he thought that after today's mission, all of this could become a reality. The protagonist, with wide eyes and an open mouth, looked at him in surprise. He began to imagine himself living an ordinary life, strolling and having fun with girls. The words about how the dream of an ordinary life and love could become a reality if he defeated the monster stuck deep in MC's head. The little girl saw him from behind, but after she turned around, he was gone. He moved very quickly across the rooftops and realized that he was not like Quater or the others, and that he didn't care about his mission or any special role as a hero. He simply wanted to be like everyone else. He wondered why the anomaly appeared precisely on the day of the festival, and how it was connected. He silently thought about how anomalies, like people, were driven by something, and he really wished he could reason with them and understand what they were thinking. He looked up at the sky and saw a bright star. The rings on his staff jingled, and in the distance, he saw a huge mountain moving. People began to panic and run away. He angrily slammed his staff on the ground and said, "No." The enormous anomaly, like a mountain, was moving toward him. He understood that it was not for nothing that he was called the strongest and most terrifying monster of all. The ground cracked and trees broke under his paws. The protagonist couldn't understand. Was this a beast, a spirit, or maybe a god? None of these even came close to describing it. The monster had a huge mouth and gigantic teeth. Tohiro rushed forward and landed next to the monster. He knew this would be a tough fight. He glared at him and whispered quietly, "He finally showed up, King of the Beasts." MC thought, "Behemoth." The priest stood on the roof and holding a gun, he shouted, "We must detain it." The protagonist accepted the order, and the exorcists began casting a spell. Stone tentacles erupted from the ground and bound the monster. The priest pulled out his pistol and fired a spell into the monster's stomach. The protagonist screamed loudly and asked, "Did he hit it?" The priest replied that he had, but he didn't care. He added that he even destroyed the stone bonds. MC glanced at the anomaly and saw that it was looking somewhere. He also noticed that he was acting rather strange for an anomaly. He wasn't going crazy or trying to attack them, but rather seemed to be looking around to avoid causing unnecessary damage. The priest shouted loudly, "Tojiro!" He saw anger on his face. The protagonist abruptly rushed toward the anomaly and thought that he didn't care. He had to destroy it, no matter what, for the sake of his desired freedom. The exorcists noticed an unusual magic circle, but didn't understand what it was. They'd never seen anything like it before. The protagonist also didn't understand what it was, but he prepared for battle. The priest screamed his name at the top of his lungs. Tojiro thought in his head that, for his own sake, he had to kill him. He drew his weapon, rushed into battle, and severed one of the monster's horns. The horn fell to the ground with a loud thud, raising large clouds of dust. Tojiro saw a bearded man in a white robe stretching his arms out before the monster. He saw the old man conjuring him into a monster that would become the stuff of legends. He continued conjuring him and said, "That's exactly how it will be." He added that his body was perfect. The protagonist looked at it all in disbelief. The old man stretched his arms higher and higher, saying that he was the best creature. His name, his role, everything about him was perfect. The monster bowed its head before him, and the old man stroked its muzzle. The betrothal was complete. The protagonist noticed a wound appear on his finger. He thought for a moment, then made another lunge and severed the anomaly's arm. Tojiro glanced at the hand and saw a scar on it. The priest continued shouting his name and shouted, "Watch out!" Out of the corner of his eye, the protagonist saw a hand moving toward him, followed by a powerful blow and a cloud of dust and shards rising up. Tojiro briefly lost consciousness and woke up in the monster's arms. The monster asked him why he hadn't struck back and spared him. She told him loudly and menacingly to answer. The protagonist looked into the anomaly's face and saw a pretty girl. He was very surprised and embarrassed and asked, "Who is she?" Tojiro loudly shouted to put him down right now. He clenched his fists in anger and realized how strong she was. He couldn't believe that she had appeared out of nowhere and was holding him in her arms. Him, a man, a guy, held in the arms of a woman. He noticed that she was also completely naked. MC covered his eyes with his hands and asked her why she was naked and what she was doing there. The girl looked at him languidly and said that he should have been the one to end her life. She asked why he hadn't done it, and did he really feel sorry for her? The monster smirked and, well, so be it, put him down. Tojuro shouted that he didn't understand what she was. She calmly replied that she was a beast, and like one, she would fulfill her duty. The girl took his hand and placed it on her large left breast. The protagonist, fear on his face, touched it. She looked him in the eye and said, "Listen." The girl said that she was a beast, God's creation. She removed his hand and added that she was the king of beasts. If she had become prey, she must follow the laws of nature and accept her fate. Tojuro fearfully asked, "What the hell was she talking about?" He looked at her and asked, "Is she a behemoth?" The protagonist looked at his finger and realized that anomalies couldn't communicate like humans. He noticed the same scar on her hand and realized that she was speaking to him right now. She growled loudly that her heart now belonged to him, and again put his hand to her chest. He was drenched in sweat and couldn't understand what was happening here. The protagonist realized that the exorcist, who had wanted a quiet life, had now made a contract with the most powerful monster of all. The walls of an ordinary apartment concealed something mythical. The protagonist stood in his apartment and spoke loudly to the priest, who declared that this was out of the question and impossible. He pointed at the girl and told them to take a look at her for themselves. She was standing in a half-bent position and didn't look so good. The MC pointed at her and added that she looked worse than death itself, and that life in a Japanese apartment with low ceilings was not physically suitable for her. At the meeting, the situation regarding the recent operation to destroy the anomaly was brought up. Agents immediately fought a special class of behemoth anomaly, but attempts to destroy the anomaly were futile, and after an attempt to seal it, it took on a humanoid form. One of the meeting members said it sounded like nonsense. A member of the commission replied that it was true, and the anomaly had taken on a humanoid form. People panicked, unsure what to do. A committee member replied that an anomaly capable of transforming into a human was a valuable research specimen, and they couldn't kill it. He added that it needed to be kept under observation, but no one knew where to keep it. The chairman scratched his chin and asked why they didn't choose Japan for this. The committee member said the report stated that a Japanese youth was at the epicenter when the anomaly assumed human form. He added that Japan would remain responsible for the incident. The man was worried and said there was no logic to this and that they needed to carefully consider the matter. He noticed the chairman's look and, with concern, agreed to take responsibility for its containment. Tojuro recalled that day and didn't understand. He had many questions about what happened that day. He didn't understand what had happened to him during the sealing, and what was that strange scar on his ring finger. He realized that even more importantly, why was a creature from the Old Testament allowed to live under the same roof with him? MC couldn't understand why the anomaly had turned into a woman, but she was still terrifying. He also remembered how she had said something stupid to him about a heart. The protagonist glanced at her fingers and saw an identical scar on her ring finger. He tried to calm himself and be patient. The priest said that, unfortunately, this decision wasn't theirs, but their superiors. Tojuro said sadly that they should keep her here, in the student dorm. The priest loudly declared that that was the first rule of an exorcist. The protagonist asked, "Are orders from superiors absolute?" The priest rudely replied, "Something else." Tojuro suggested, "The mission comes first." The priest placed his hands on his shoulders and said, "Exactly." He told him not to worry because he would also stay here and check in from time to time on how he was doing. MC thought that, simply put, he couldn't give up on all of this. The priest approached the door, opened it, and told him to think about it from a different perspective. He would literally be living with a creature from legend, and this would be a good opportunity to learn more about anomalies, he added, telling Tojuro to try. He glanced at the king of beasts and said, "Easy to say." The girl peered out of the balcony and saw the city. She asked who owned this human settlement. She stretched out to her full height and scratched the ceiling with her horn, saying that it was the first time she had entered a human dwelling. The protagonist saw her scratching the ceiling and said that every time she moved, she destroyed everything. Let her be careful. The girl folded her arms in front of her and said that it was impossible, because she was the king of beasts, and every step she took brought the ruins with her. MC gritted his teeth in anger and shouted loudly at her to be more careful. He pointed his finger at her and said that he didn't care if she was the king of beasts or anyone else. If she continued, not a stone would be left standing in this house. The protagonist asked how they would live and escape the cold and heat, especially since someone had built this dwelling, and she was wasting his efforts with her destruction. The girl nodded silently and listened to him. Tojuro ordered her to sit and stay put while he cleaned up the mess. She nodded and did as he ordered. The protagonist screamed about how his ceiling was now covered in cracks, but he reassured himself, saying that just a little bit more. The girl sat silently on the floor in the middle of the room, her legs tucked under her. The protagonist angrily mumbled that everything was ready. She thought that he was very strict. Tojuro swept the floor and thought about how Collateral had said that they would complete the mission successfully, and he would receive the freedom he desired. Yeah. Right. The protagonist remembered the priest's words, but he didn't consider it freedom, more of an observation mission. The girl tore the head off a toy rabbit and asked when he would eat her flesh. The MC loudly and angrily asked, "Is she doing this again?" She bared part of her body and assured him that her flesh would be to his liking, especially around her stomach and legs. Tojuro loudly told her to cover up and added that he wouldn't eat her. He asked her to stop talking about it. He was sorting through vegetables and telling her that in the huge human settlement, there was meat tastier than hers. He served her a full plate of rice and meat and told her to try it. She popped the spoon into her mouth and noticeably sped up. The protagonist saw how voraciously the monster was eating and asked, "What is it so delicious?" The girl, with her mouth full, tried to smile. The MC looked at her with interest and said, "I liked it once." He asked if she wanted more. The girl ate all the food in the house and, finishing the last piece, asked for more. The protagonist replied that she had eaten everything and there was nothing left in the house. She looked at him sadly, after which he said he understood and said he'll run to the store now and buy her something. He left the house and realized he hadn't even tried his own rice. Tojuro didn't understand what he was even doing. The protagonist remembered how she pointed to her body and said there was delicious meat there too. He understood that not only was he living with an anomaly that constantly offered him to eat her, but she literally destroyed everything she touched. He was worried about her gobbling up all the food in the house, but he was reassured that she at least tried to listen to him and ate his cooking with pleasure. He realized that this woman was serious. The protagonist sat near the grocery shelf, wondering what anomalies even ate. Quattro stood behind him and asked, "Did you go out for groceries?" Tojuro asked. "Did you decide to visit them again?" The priest replied that he'd already said he'd stay nearby. MC sadly asked, "Really that close?" The priest calmly asked, "Who was he choosing food for? For Behemoth?" The protagonist said that for himself too. After all, she ate everything in their house. He saw the priest's stunned expression and added with a smirk, if only he could have seen her upset face when she found out there was no more food in the house. Tojuro looked down and told the priest that he looked at her and didn't see her as an anomaly who wished harm on people. He added that perhaps, with her help, they would be able to communicate with other anomalies and finally find common ground with them. He spoke even louder. "Who knows, maybe they won't have to kill them and will find a way to live peacefully with them." The priest stopped him and advised him not to think about it that way, because no matter how she behaved now, humans and anomalies are different species. And at any moment an anomaly could take a person's life, especially if it's a behemoth. The protagonist sadly tried to object, saying that she hadn't transformed into a beast again and hadn't attacked anyone. Quattro calmly replied that it would be too late to regret it once she bit his hand. He looked at him and hoped he understood. The priest added that no one was stopping him from establishing contact with her, but he mustn't let his guard down and resist her peaceful nature, because no one ever knew when she would transform back into a beast and begin to wreak havoc. Tojuro sadly said he didn't think she was bad, and the scar on his finger began to hiss. He and the priest looked at his hand in surprise and heard a message stating that more than 10 minutes had passed since he was 200 meters away from the object, and the engagement was annulled. The protagonist, surprised, asked why the scar was talking to him, and what the hell was this object? They pointed their fingers at each other and shouted in unison, "Behemoth!" They felt the ground shake beneath their feet and ran out into the street. People passing by didn't understand what it was. MC realized that a small house in Japan was unsuitable for anomalies of his size, and he shouted in fear. Did she turn into a beast again? He realized that the behemoth had assumed its true form, and the area was about to turn into ruins. The protagonist didn't understand how this could happen, and asked the priest how it even happened. Quad adjusted his glasses and said that he himself, to be honest, had no idea, but added that he knew for sure that if they didn't stop her, many innocent citizens would suffer. The protagonist looked at his ring and shouted for everything to be restored to how it was, to which he received the answer that it was currently impossible. Scar added that to do this, the behemoth needed to be subdued. The monster roared very loudly throughout the street. Quattro pulled out a gun and told Tojuro that she had revealed her true nature and that they needed to go. The protagonist looked at him in confusion and asked why he had pulled out a gun. Quattro responded rudely, "Isn't it obvious?" He added that their job was to protect the city's residents. Quattro said he didn't know what exactly he meant by pacify, but if she continued to harm the city and its residents, they, as exorcists, would have no choice but to exorcise her. MC, fear in his eyes, asked again, "Exorcise?" He realized that this definitely couldn't be allowed and rushed toward the behemoth. The monster slammed its hand into the ground, raising large clouds of dust causing people to scatter. Quattro tried to stop Tojuro, saying that things were dire and that at this rate the city would be razed to the ground. Quattro took aim and said they needed to act. MC thought there had to be a way to stop her. He decided, come what may, took a deep breath and shouted loudly, "Stop! Sit down!" The priest, the people, and the beast looked at him in bewilderment, but the monster sat down, which surprised Quattro. The protagonist himself didn't expect it to work, but it did, and now she's not destroying everything around her. Quattro noticed something strange in the sky. He pointed and said it was too early to relax. MC didn't understand what he was talking about, so Quattro repeated, "In the sky." They looked up and saw a large number of flying anomalies. The protagonist noted that the entire sky was filled with them, but there hadn't been any notifications about so many anomalies in the area. Quattro said teasingly. Indeed. They noticed that all the anomalies were circling around her. Tojuro couldn't believe she'd summoned them all. Quattro smiled and replied that reality was much harsher than fairy tales and legends. The protagonist looked up at the sky in fear and realized that anomalies were indeed dangerous creatures, but he remembered how she had sweetly eaten his rice. The beast struck the anomaly, sending it flying into a building. The protagonist remembered what the young man had said about destroying human dwellings. He shouted loudly, "Behemoth!" The beast let out a loud roar, causing all the anomalies to scatter. Scar spoke. Returning to contact, target assumes human form. The beast transformed into a human and said that these guys came to gawk because a behemoth appeared and she drove them away. The protagonist glanced happily at the girl, but she was naked again. He tore off some rag and covered her. Quattro looked at them in surprise, unable to believe the contract had actually been made. Tojuro looked at the girl, wondering how strong she was. At the next meeting, a committee member asked what the extent of the collateral damage was, to which he received the reply that several buildings had been destroyed, but miraculously there were no casualties. A member of the committee asked the chairman if he really intended to keep him in Japan. He replied that there was no choice for now, and such orders came from above. The chairman added that, if you think about it, this was their chance, because it was an unknown power that no country had ever possessed. The chairman said that, for example, if that guy could continue to control the behemoth, it would be a huge help for them. A member of the meeting asked, "Control? What did he mean?" The chairman replied that the behemoth could, for example, be made to fall in love. The members looked at him in bewilderment, and the girl teased him. The chairman, it turns out, is a romantic. He asked her to shut up, and added that it was important because these were romantic feelings. The chairman added that if he tamed the behemoth this way, it would be easier to deal with. He said that for now, to avoid a recurrence of such incidents, they would request support from the Kosozu headquarters and keep an eye on it. The protagonist considered whether she would understand, as Katoru had said, and if they could reach an agreement, perhaps he would never have to kill again and he could return to a normal life. He knew there was some logic to it, but he didn't understand whether it was possible to make someone fall in love and obey. The leader folded his hands in front of him and said, "As they say, all's fair in love and war." He added that it was worth a try and announced that the next mission had been determined, to make the behemoth fall in love with the young man. MC felt he was still a long way from a normal life. The man from the mayor's office said that standard procedures had been completed and 90% of the damaged buildings had been restored, adding that they had been ordered to remain here. Tojuro loudly asked, seriously, after everything that had happened, he thought they would be isolated. The man replied that they were a special case. He approached the door with his assistant and said that if any problems arose, they could contact him anytime. The man bowed and they left. The protagonist and the girl looked at them in bewilderment. MC considered the government's power, but he wondered if they should really stay in the city center. He noticed the girl sitting there watching TV and wondered if they could stay like this. And maybe if he could establish normal contact with this creature, and they got along well, something would change. Tojuro asked her not to break anything next time, but received no reaction. The girl saw various delicacies on TV and couldn't tear herself away. MC noted that it was Chinatown, after which she opened her mouth and began staring at him. The protagonist asked the priest if he should take the behemoth to Chinatown. He agreed, adding that she was glued to the TV. Tojuro wondered if he could treat her to food. Maybe they really would become closer. He realized that after that incident, he truly didn't think the behemoth was bad. The protagonist explained this to the priest, saying that he would truly understand Ike's thoughts, since he was now something like her guardian. Quattro adjusted his glasses with a smile and said, "Tojuro as a guardian." The protagonist blushed and said he was trying his best, wasn't he? The priest received a call on his phone and flatly thanked him for his efforts. Tojuro tried to listen. The head of Exorcism's Japanese branch, Kamanuma, had called Tojuro and said that the opposing side wished to speak with him personally. He added that the behemoth was a matter of the utmost importance to Exorcism, and they would provide their full support. He asked for a warm but utmost welcome. Tojuro angrily asked, "Seriously?" The head replied, "You bet." He added loudly that they, too, wanted to establish a good relationship with the behemoth and tame it, but he abruptly corrected himself. No, and he said they should get closer. Then maybe the behemoth would listen to his words. The protagonist was surprised, saying that this made sense because he'd been thinking about it. The leader said that if he showed her the city well and she liked it, she wouldn't just stop destroying it, she'd even protect it. The protagonist agreed, and the leader added that it was now his job as a guide to show her the delights of the human world. He accepted his order, and the leader added that the level of sympathy was the key, once and for all. The leader asked for a closer connection and to become a special man for the behemoth. He called it a sortie, adding that it would be like accompanying her on a date, asking her to act with the intention of making her fall in love with him. The MC, surprised, thought, a date? He led the girl outside, and they walked along a crowded alley. He walked along the street with her, thinking that this was just some kind of chatter, because it could end up worse than on a mission to destroy Ike's. He noted that before talking about dating and falling in love, he'd never even gone out with girls. The protagonist didn't understand what to do. or what a date even was. He didn't know what to do for it to be considered a date. Tojuro reflected on the fact that they'd even prepared special clothes for the date. People noticed her on the street and commented on how beautiful she was. He looked at her and thought that even in human clothes, she was dressed tastefully, and it was truly beautiful. The protagonist collected a large number of travel magazines and realized that today he had to accompany her properly. He called out to her and said he'd pored over a psychology book and would show her a ton of things today. They'd settled on a magazine where he'd already spotted a landmark. The beast muttered something delicious smelled and ran off. Tojuro tried to get her attention and lead her to a tourist spot, adding that there was a place with delicious tea a bit further on. But she ignored him and continued eating. The girl grabbed him by the chest and pulled him closer. She told him he was very slow, adding that there were a lot of people here and that he could get lost because of his small stature. He angrily shouted that it was just her being so big. She replied that she didn't care and told him to hold on to her. He replayed her words about not caring in his head in surprise. The girl placed her hand on her chest and said he could do whatever he wanted because, after all, it was his hand. The people heard this phrase and began to look at them in confusion. The protagonist angrily asked her to stop, saying they were being looked at strangely. He took her hand, and they continued down the street. People didn't understand who they were. Brothers, parents, and a child, maybe a couple. But they were considered cute. Tojuro thought holding hands was the most normal thing to do. But if you think about it, a guy and a girl holding hands, he was very embarrassed by it. He thought sweetly about how to hold hands properly, but stopped himself and remembered how he often did this with his father and mother. He was worried about this escort and just wanted everything to be okay. He did this so they wouldn't lose each other. Tojuro held her hand and felt something strange. He wanted someone to help him. The girl read the word escort on the sign and asked what it was. The protagonist grimaced and didn't answer her. She put a pie in her mouth and noted that, no matter how you look at it, the human world is very interesting. She looked at the happy girls and the shoppers standing in line. The girl remarked that food also imparts different flavors. The protagonist agreed, adding that he, too, had always noticed how delicious it smelled. She sadly remarked that things usually break when she gets close. The girl added that everyone was afraid of her and that she could only get to a place like this by assuming this form. Tojuro was surprised by what he heard and couldn't believe his ears. He asked her why she'd been watching from afar. The girl nodded approvingly and glanced at him, adding that she didn't want to inconvenience anyone with her presence. Quater quietly overheard the conversation and became wary. The protagonist, surprised by what she said, looked at her silently. He added that she really wasn't bad. She glanced at him pathetically and said, "You're looking at me and saying, 'Isn't bad?'" He agreed with her and remembered that her actions back then had been strange. He noticed that she tried not to destroy, which explained a lot, and besides, she had listened to him the other day. She looked him in the eyes and said that she was Ike, that she crushes and attacks. Tojuro looked at her and asked, "Is that what she was talking about now?" She chuckled and moved closer to his face. The girl quietly muttered, "Not bad." Well, she added that since he had fulfilled her wish, then he too is not bad. She kindly asked him to bring her here again. Quater saw all this from around the corner and was pleased with what was happening. He noticed that the relationship with the behemoth was developing well. Quater adjusted his glasses and thought that perhaps taming wasn't such a bad strategy, and if he made the target fall in love, Tojuro could gain control over the behemoth's thoughts. The protagonist didn't understand what kind of control, since he himself seemed to be under control now. The girl looked into his eyes and remarked that she wouldn't mind flirting with him. He realized she even had a girl-like reaction. Tojuro realized he'd been completely floored. It was simply a defensive reaction, but here the balance of power was completely reversed. Quatre realized this was somewhat unexpected and wondered how he should report to headquarters. The girl saw fear in his eyes and asked, "What's wrong?" Tojuro quietly and worriedly replied that nothing had happened, but thoughts swirled in his head about it being a behemoth and that it couldn't be forgiven, but must be killed and destroyed. A report on the connection between the appearance of Ike and legends. Other creatures take forms remarkably similar to local folklore. One hypothesis was put forward, that the Ike, using some ability, shaped their appearance, mimicking legends, and that such a possibility existed. Tojuro was passing by with a bag and noticed Quater reading complex materials. He remarked that he liked books. Quater agreed with him and said that they were things with a history, and that was good. He added with a smile that, besides, legends and fairy tales also contain methods for taming mythical creatures. Quatre remarked that if he read them, he might find a way to defeat her. The protagonist glanced at the book with confusion and asked, "Who?" Quatre smiled and answered, "Behemoth." He remarked that he had noticed how he had become interested in her as a woman. He grumbled discontentedly. What? Quatre assumed there might be something in there about her preferences, for example, her favorite type of man. The protagonist discontentedly shouted that it wasn't that, but that she was a behemoth. Quatre handed him the book and added that gathering information was very important, because they had to have him tame the behemoth. Tojuro leafed through the book and saw a toy he once had. He thought, Ike changed shape, using some kind of power. right? The protagonist realized that if they were capable of such a thing, it only added to the mystery. He tried to understand what an EK really was. The girl heard a strange metallic sound, and a ventilation grate fell to the right of the bathtub she was lying in. Small anomalies jumped out with cutlery in their hands and tried to kill the behemoth. Quattro noticed the strange sound in the bathroom and asked, "What's going on?" Behemoth ran out of the bath very quickly and fell on Tojuro, covering him with her body. She crushed his face with her large breasts, and he couldn't figure out what she was doing. The protagonist pulled out his things and told the behemoth to get dressed. MC and the behemoth looked at the attackers, confused as to who they were. Quattro smiled and asked, "Haven't you seen them before?" He glanced at them and said they were goblins. Tojuro asked in surprise, "Goblins?" He remembered how they looked in the book and asked in surprise, "Shouldn't they be different, according to the materials?" Quattro replied that they were usually only mildly mischievous, so they rarely became targets for destruction. He added that they were also weak, and in European folklore interpretations, moreover, in modern times they were depicted as evil, cunning, and minor demons. Quattro noted that there were few reports of attacks on people, but in other words, their purpose. The small goblins hopped across the floor, collecting trash and constantly repeating the word life. The girl looked at them with an angry gaze and added that if he dared involve the young man in this, there would be no mercy. She added angrily that he would regret ever daring to touch the beast lord's domain, even for a moment. The protagonist remembered how the girl at the market had said she didn't want anyone to get hurt because of her presence. He stopped her abruptly, looked her in the eye, and said he wanted to try something. Tojuro asked the priest to throw him the book. Quattro accurately tossed it right into his hands. The protagonist quickly flipped through the pages, looking for the page about goblins. He searched the book, recalling legends and fairy tales. There really are methods for taming mythical creatures. He quickly found the right page and loudly asked the behemoth to scatter the fluff from the pillows. The goblins began to lose their minds at the sight of so much trash. They made strange sounds and then began cleaning up altogether. Quattro saw this, but couldn't understand why they were doing it. MC looked at the priest with a smile and replied that it was legends. He added that they might be considered monsters now, but in fact, they were originally house spirits. The protagonist noted that they like to play pranks and are sometimes mischievous, and they were called, I think, brownies. He mentioned that there was a theory that helping around the house was also a side of goblins, like in that picture book. He looked at the cute goblins and reminded Quat he himself said there were taming methods there. Quattro looked at the goblins in surprise and couldn't believe it actually worked. The goblins gathered all the trash in one pile and started shouting, "Clean up! Clean up!" Tojuro noticed that the house instantly became clean. He handed them 2 cookies, adding that they were their thanks. The goblins were overjoyed at this gift and immediately began breaking the cookies and sharing them with each other. The protagonist joyfully raised his hands and shouted, "It worked!" The girl caught his attention and told him to look at them. Tojuro smiled and said, "No one was hurt this time, so she has nothing to worry about and can stay here." The monster looked at him sweetly and said that he was really trying to make her wish come true. He glanced at her and replied, "True." The girl was touched by his words and pressed her chest against him again. MC pulled away from her with a disgruntled expression, confused. The girl looked at him pathetically and said, "Nothing." She asked when the treats would be. Tojuro, in a rough voice, forced her to get dressed first. He again thought about the attacking EK aiming for the behemoth. He couldn't understand, since they were EK and had come specifically to kill. So was the behemoth really that much of a hindrance? The leader sat at his desk, watching the anomaly and Tojuro. The nun sitting next to him remarked that he was very naive, considering this girl was dangerous. The leader picked up the TV remote and asked doubtfully, "Really?" He added that he thought everything was going quite well. The nun turned on a video on the TV and assumed the leader really wanted to tame the EK. But EK are creatures that use dangerous abilities inaccessible to humans and destroy everything in the blink of an eye. She noted that this is what they are like, and said that excessive violence must be properly suppressed with force. The nun turned off the TV and said it was time to call those guys for help, the professionals in destroying EK. The girl had slept poorly and dreamed that she had turned into a monster again and began to destroy everything and sow chaos. She really didn't want to destroy the city and see people fleeing from her. The girl opened her eyes and saw that she was sleeping in the same bed with Tojuro. The protagonist noticed the rain outside and put on a raincoat. The girl really didn't want to let him go outside, as she was worried about becoming a monster again. MC asked her to let him go, not understanding what was wrong with her today. She asked him where he was going and remarked that it was best not to leave the king of beasts alone. Tojuro rudely replied that he was going to clean the gutters, even though he didn't want to, but he couldn't do anything about it because he was on duty. The girl looked at him worriedly and said that she, a behemoth, and if she parted with him, she would return to her true form. The protagonist reassured her and said that everything would be fine because he would be there. Quattro strolled through Japan with an umbrella in hand and a bag slung over his shoulder, and noted that this country truly was a treasure trove of books, printed texts and illustrated fairy tales, There was no way to resist everything. He climbed the stairs to Tojuro's house and noticed the behemoth on the balcony. He greeted her and noticed her sweet face playing with the goblins. Quatre noted that this was a rather rare expression. He asked with interest why she was there. She pointed a sad finger at the protagonist and added that he had left her and gone. Quatre saw him and asked, "Cleaning up the neighborhood, huh?" He thought it was good that he had become so attached to her. Quatre saw her waiting for Tojuro to return and realized that everything was going as planned, and in any case, this was probably a reason to rejoice. The girl glanced at the bag of books and asked him, "What is this?" Quatre picked up the book and said it was stories and his hobby. He handed it to her and offered to read it. She took the small book in her hand and, unintentionally, began to crumple it. Quatre took the book and said it was better not to do that, as he had a bad feeling about her. He turned to her with a smile and asked her to tell him about herself. The girl looked at him in bewilderment. Quatre assumed that the story of a divine beast like her was pure myth, right? He added that he was very interested in the side of myth that is not told, as her story was worthy of becoming a legend, and he also wanted to hear it. Quatre smiled and said he was joking. She listened silently and said it was nothing special. Quatre doubted her words and said, again. The girl glanced at the Cathar and said it was true, nothing, because every time she appeared in the villages, she simply walked around and broke things. Quatre listened with great interest and a sly expression. The girl added that she sometimes dropped in out of curiosity about human customs, but each time she destroyed houses, and now the surrounding lands were turning into a wasteland. She noticed that as soon as she stepped, destruction began to occur everywhere, and then came to her senses, and it turned out that she was the king of beasts. She noted that this is exactly how it looked from the king of beasts' perspective. The monster looked at the protagonist from the balcony and said that since then, people have not come near her, because initially she was a beast far from the vanity of the world, but nothing has changed, and she has become accustomed to solitude. Quatre sadly replied that it really doesn't seem that way. She watched Tojuro interact with his neighbor and realized he'd upended even the norm for the king of beasts. The girl looked at him sweetly, eager for the protagonist to finish work and return to her. Quatre noticed this and teased her, smiling as he asked, "It's lonely without Tojuro around, isn't it?" The girl looked at the priest and said she felt lonely. Quatre pointed out that now, unlike before, Tojuro was always by her side, right? He added that among humans, he was truly rare, one who cared for and protected her. He glanced at the protagonist and said she was no longer a lonely beast, because Tojuro was becoming a part of her daily life. If she destroyed something, he'd scold her and care for her, but he'd stay by her side, thinking about her happiness. She realized that happiness lay in the everyday. The protagonist called out to the girl and waved. He added that the rain had stopped and invited her to go for a walk since he'd finished cleaning and the supermarket had a special on pork. He asked her if she would go with him. The girl was reminiscing about sweet moments with him and, after a brief pause, said yes. Quatre was surprised to see the behemoth jump over the railing and leap from the second floor to the ground. Tojuro asked him if he wanted to go with them. Quatre hesitated and replied that he couldn't, adding that he was going out and would be back soon. Quatre considered the bruise on his finger and thought it was a hallucination, but the target's emotions were changing. The protagonist and the behemoth were walking down the street when a huge metal chain flew at them. The behemoth quickly and deftly covered the protagonist with her body. MC noted that she moved surprisingly nimbly despite her enormous size. Quatre looked at all this in bewilderment, thinking about the wound on the behemoth's skin. Tojuro stared at the dark silhouette, but couldn't figure out who it was. The girl with the chains in her hands asked, had he forgotten her? She added that she had taught him to strike other creatures and destroy them immediately, because if he hesitated, there would be a sea of victims. The protagonist, with a puzzled expression and a trembling voice, wanted to ask why her. The soldier put her hand to her mouth and asked, how can he talk like this to his elder? It seems she needs to hammer this into his head one more time. The priest glanced at her and realized she should be on another mission. But who had called her? This girl was an exos, a high-ranking captain of a fighter squad. The protagonist realized that Sun Hunza stood before him, with the aura of a warrior's overwhelming strength. Hunza suddenly appeared behind the protagonist, licked his cheek, and asked, were you injured again? The girl took his hand and added that he wasn't prepared enough, as expected, and needed re-education. She bit his finger lightly, after which Behemoth pushed her away with her hand and covered the protagonist. Quatre called out to the Behemoth and the protagonist, asking what that was and who the woman was. The protagonist explained that the girl was Sun Hongse, one of the best elite exorcists among them, and one of those who hated Ikes the most. Tojuro picked up his staff but couldn't understand why the elder was there. He moved the Behemoth behind him and began a conversation. He noted that they hadn't seen each other for a while. She looked into his eyes and suggested that perhaps there had been a communication blackout from headquarters. MC added that he and the Behemoth were together because of orders from above. Huntz replied that she had heard, but it didn't matter. She swung her weapon, but couldn't understand why he, of all people, had received such an order. The protagonist parried the blow and heard Quattro ask him to step back, as he would destroy her. Tojuro, her voice filled with anxiety, asked not to do it here, as they were in the city. Quattro tried to calm him down and said he would finish quickly. The protagonist shouted loudly and asked everyone to wait. He asked her, she was also told about this from above, right? He noted that a behemoth was a very rare case of an isekai becoming human. The girl looked at him in bewilderment and asked, so what? The protagonist again loudly asked to be heard and added that recently they had even managed to befriend the goblins. He understood that they had always attacked them, but now the situation was no longer such that they only needed to destroy them. Tojuro covered the behemoth with his hands and added that she didn't need to be destroyed either, although she was clumsy but kind. He watched the older woman prepare for battle and added that they no longer needed to fight and asked, isn't that better? Hunsa, her voice filled with anger, insisted that there was no need to harbor feelings for animals and that isekai should be immediately destroyed, even if they had any willpower. As long as they were isekai, the end was the same. She swung her weapon and asked the protagonist to step back. The behemoth parried the blow with its hand and prepared to fight. The protagonist asked her to step back, as the blade was very sharp. The behemoth calmly said, and this is a female, clear and beautiful. She looked into his eyes and noted that initially this world was the law of the jungle and one simply needed to win. Tojuro remembered how this girl had bitten his finger and told the behemoth it was a female who tried to devour the young man. The behemoth, with a sweet face, repeated his words, and he added that she was one of those who devoured people like him. The elder prepared to strike the next blow, and in a rough voice told her not to dare speak human words with the mouth of the isekai. She continued to attack the behemoth, insisting that these creatures would do anything to survive and that it was just a game of impersonation. Huns made another powerful swing with her sharp weapon and said, before it's too late. Tojuro saw that things were bad and jumped toward the behemoth. He pushed her aside and positioned himself in the spot where the weapon had struck. The behemoth cried out with worry in her voice. Young man? She thought that she could not allow this because she belonged to this young man, and this young man belonged to her. The scar on the behemoth's arm said, restrictions removed, and a bright light bathed the entire street, slightly blinding the protagonist. Tojuro saw how the beast lord, the behemoth, began to transform. The captain saw all this but couldn't understand what it was or what was happening. The scar on the behemoth's arm indicated that the transition to the mode was beginning. The behemoth began to glow brightly and increase in size. The protagonist began to worry about the behemoth and the elder. He saw them preparing to fight, but later noticed someone calming the captain down. The protagonist noticed familiar faces and asked them, it seems they are from the Japanese branch? He added that it was good that they were unharmed. The girl and the boy stopped the elder and introduced themselves as subordinates of the head of the Japanese branch, exorcists, Agent A and Agent B. They approached the captain and explained that no matter how many orders to destroy her she received from above, the Japanese branch could not condone reckless military actions in the city. He added that, furthermore, the behemoth's changes showed an increase in its ability scores. Passers-by, worried, were confused about the explosion. Agent B quickly drew a sign reading, TV series filming, and held it above her head, suggesting that further intervention would be dangerous. The agent put on dark glasses, pulled a memory eraser from her pocket, and asked passers-by to look closely at the wand. Passers-by forgot everything they'd seen after the small flash. Agent A glanced at the protagonist and added that this incident was temporarily transferred to the Japanese branch's jurisdiction. Agent B threw the captain over her shoulder and carried her to the side. Hunza angrily and loudly shouted that she wouldn't forgive Tojuro for this. The protagonist shouted loudly and apologized to the elder. He looked into Behemoth's eyes and added that he didn't understand anything at all. Behemoth calmly replied, the young man wants to protect her, and she wants to protect him too. She glanced at the scar on her arm and noticed that her body seemed easier to control than usual. She assumed it was the scar's effect. The protagonist looked at her happily and said that was very cool. He smiled and suggested that if her body was easier to control, it meant she might be able to avoid destroying everything around. Behemoth looked at him with affection and thought that was a good thing. Tojuro raised his index finger and said that was excellent, and now they would try not to hurt people. Behemoth replied that she understood and said that she wouldn't allow it. Quattro stood in front of his colleagues and asked, so, the order to destroy Behemoth did come from this person? His colleague replied that she was his boss too. The girl with the puppy around her neck asked the priest to help them with their task. Quattro smiled and replied that he was more of a pro-Behemoth camp now. The girl added that she also hadn't seen Tojuro in a long time. She quietly said that she came here with great enthusiasm, especially the captain. The elder remembered her dear Todoro-kun with sadness on her face, but that cow Iki took him from her. She tearfully remembered him at 6 years old and how she cared for him from then on, when he was such a cutie. The captain couldn't understand why he had become like this now. The exorcists noted that she had a rather distorted understanding of how to treat people. Quattro added that she simply didn't know how to show love properly. Quattro received a notification on his phone and remarked that if she let her go, it would be better for them too. He said that if they had to fight her, they would be in trouble too, and in any case, he suggested keeping their distance and setting aside time for negotiations. A message from the Japanese branch arrived on his phone, calling for an urgent meeting. Quater announced aloud that the exorcists were about to gather. The girl standing next to him asked, "Them too?" He glanced at the notification again and realized he sensed something was wrong. The ship was sailing through coastal waters. The sailors on board noticed that the vessel was acting strangely. One sailor asked, "Are there reefs?" A second sailor stood next to him and asked, "What reefs?" He added, "They're in the middle of the sea." The ship's captain frantically tried to turn the wheel, unable to understand what was happening because the wheel wasn't responding. A huge monster leaped out of the water and fell directly onto the ship, shattering it into pieces. The sailors only had time to ask, "What the hell is this?" Quater called a council and explained that in recent days, alarming news had been coming from the Tokyo Islands about shipwrecks looming off the coast, so many incomprehensible things, and many missing people. He added that the cause was unknown, as everything happened exclusively at night, and those who managed to escape insisted on one thing: an island had appeared to them. The protagonist glanced at the paper in surprise and asked, "An island?" Quater recalled the words of the survivors, how they had described how an island had suddenly appeared right in the middle of the sea, and how they had encountered it. He realized that this was no coincidence, and most likely, some evil spirit was involved. After a short pause, the Behemoth and the Elder One locked eyes. Quater applauded with a smile and suggested a break for his friends. He simply suggested they forget about the recent events. Huns replied, completely emotionless, that it was impossible, since these evil spirits couldn't be destroyed or driven away. Tojuro noticed another problem in their conversation and asked the captain not to start arguing again. The exorcist with long bangs confirmed his words. She sat down casually and suggested a get-together until they got to a serious investigation. All the exorcists looked at her in bewilderment and asked, "A party?" She calmly replied that reports of evil spirits only appear at night, and there were no signs at all right now. The girl added, "It's also important to get to know your comrades." She introduced herself as Irushi and eagerly wanted to meet Behemoth-kun. The captain angrily asked her, "Irushi? Seriously?" Irushi, smiling, told the captain that she was deliberately dragging out the conversation with Tojuro. She quietly whispered in his ear to leave the Behemoth with them and try to have a heart-to-heart with the captain himself. MC asked, surprised, "What?" Irushi looked him in the eye and said the captain had been worried about him all this time. The protagonist asked in surprise, "She, Senpai Huns, was worried?" Irushi replied that she wasn't exactly open. After all, she was the captain and had her own plans. Quattro loomed over Tojuro and agreed with the girl's words, adding that since they were now a team, they needed to work together. Irushi clenched her fists and asked him to get the captain to talk before the mission began, adding that he could flirt and put a little pressure on her. The protagonist couldn't understand why he should be the one to do that. Irushi asked, "Please," adding that only he could handle it, since they needed to extinguish the evil spirits at night, so it was better not to drag it out during the day. After everyone reached the coast, the Behemoth and some exorcists changed into swimsuits and began playing beach volleyball and sunbathing. Irushi threw another serve and hit the Behemoth in the face. She accidentally got sand in her mouth, and then, with her magic, she showered Irushi with sand. The protagonist quickly moved aside, the older one unable to understand why all the responsibility fell on him. The boys, lying on the sand, remarked that they were in trouble. With such a resort mood, it would be better to go back home. They asked him why he wasn't participating, and how he felt about being at the seaside for the first time. Tojuro rudely told them to shut up, as he had more important things to do. The boy began pulling down his shorts and suggested that the other boys take their clothes off too. MC angrily ordered them to shut up and called them idiots. The boys took off their sunglasses and realized he should have talked to Hansa-san, that girl from the first anti-evil squad. They said pitifully that they'd gone to sea, and he wouldn't even get a proper swim, adding that they were on his side. Without thinking twice, the boys ran toward Behemoth with their hands up and offered to play beach ball with him. Behemoth looked back and noticed the protagonist walking by with a sad, downcast face. Tojuro thought that with this senpai, things weren't so simple after all, because she wanted to wipe out all the evil, and that was it. He only had to relax around her, and he was screwed. He remembered how, when he was very little, he'd ended up in her squad, and the back that protected him then seemed the most reliable. MC realized she was genuinely worried about him. Aside from the evil spirit theme, she wasn't such a terrible senpai. She called out to him from behind, and the protagonist turned around, fear in his eyes. He saw her in a swimsuit and was surprised that she had appeared. The protagonist knew this couldn't be right, because if they couldn't find common ground, things would be worse for everyone. MC asked her, "Isn't she going to the general meeting?" The captain turned her head away in displeasure and apologized. "He probably prefers to communicate with a K. He can go." Tojuro, embarrassed and stuttering, said that he came to see her. She looked at him tenderly, but couldn't believe he had come to see her. The protagonist thought that this wasn't the reaction he expected from her. He glared at her angrily and thought, now then. The girl narrowed her eyes and saw through him. She realized that Arushi had fooled him. The captain realized she definitely wouldn't give up just because Tojuro had arrived, but to her, he was still just as sweet and just as scary. The protagonist loudly told her it was true. They hadn't seen each other in a while, and also remarked that she was as strong as ever. She looked him in the face and said that it seemed he had lost his cool and couldn't even anticipate such an attack, and even sided with Ike. The elder turned away and realized that she was too happy that she could talk to him again. She felt like she was losing. Tojuro noticed how revealing her outfit was, practically naked. The girl looked at him and thought about how cute he used to be, but now he was a shameless brat. Even that childish cuteness still remained, even though he had become much larger than before. It was as if a huge snake appeared behind her and told her to devour him. She walked closer to him and began to remove his shirt. MC tried to stop her, not understanding what was happening. The girl lowered his shirt and noted that the wounds had increased. While he was away from her, he'd sustained similar injuries again. She added sadly that even after that, he was still with Ike. Tojuro tried to awkwardly justify himself, but noted that the behemoth was indeed quite good. Of course, Ike's was inflicting wounds on them, and the death toll wasn't decreasing. She herself saw this constantly on the front lines. MC punched himself in the chest and added that he wanted to change that, because from the endless killings, everyone was simply dying in vain, and he didn't want anyone else to die, neither Behemoth nor the eldest. Hans leaned closer to him and said that he hadn't changed at all since then and remained as naive and sweet as ever. She took him by the shoulders and added that he didn't understand anything. After all, it is precisely because of such carelessness of those who build only ideals that Ikes goes wild and kills innocent people. Behemoth turned and noticed the young man and the captain standing together. She assumed a fighting stance and froze. Arushi glanced at the ocean and asked, "What, was there an island there?" They all looked at the elder and saw confusion in her eyes. The captain suddenly felt a strange presence. She began to consider options. Rocks? A sandbank? Hans realized something was wrong. Such a thing couldn't be there. Arushi and Quatre screamed in fear. They realized it was a ghost island and were suddenly covered by a huge wave. The protagonist fell into the water, thinking it was a tsunami. He saw the elder screaming his name with fear in her eyes and was surprised by this. MC realized something gigantic was rising from the depths. In the long history of seafaring, it had appeared again and again, sometimes as a snake, sometimes as a turtle, or even a crocodile. When it surfaced, it was mistaken for a small island, and people even landed on it. This legendary creature attacked ships and people all over the world. Arushi and the exorcists saw the monster swallow the protagonist. The elder and the behemoth rushed to the attack to save him. The behemoth couldn't understand how the monster could do such a thing and fired a large beam of energy at it. Hans tried to stop her and asked if she was in her right mind. She added that it wasn't a fact that he was dead. If she blows this Ike up from the inside, what will happen to him? She suggested she think for a moment. Hans rudely told her not to rush headlong, because Tojuro's life was at stake. An exorcist from the shore asked if the people were all right. The captain ordered the behemoth not to come any closer, because they would be immobilized in the water, and there would be even more casualties. She dove underwater and thought about making sure Tojuro was okay first. She really wanted to believe that this guy, despite being the last subordinate exorcist, was still alive. Behemoth heard a familiar voice from the scar and asked, "Young man?" A question came from the scar. Behemoth? Hans, surprised, asked what they were communicating with. The protagonist replied that they were in contact and reported that he was alive. The captain was very happy to hear this. MC loudly asked not to attack him. Hans asked discontentedly, how can he now insist that he doesn't want to hurt Ike? He replied that that was not true, and that it seemed he had hit him straight in the stomach. MC added that there were other survivors in his belly, probably those who went missing after the shipwreck. The captain realized that attacking Ike was now completely impossible. The protagonist, through the scar, replied that he would save them and asked them to try to neutralize this guy without causing serious injury until they got out. Hans realized this was reckless, since such a giant couldn't be restrained without injuring him. The behemoth listened to his voice with a joyful expression, then abruptly dove into the water. The captain looked at her with a strange expression, unable to comprehend what she was planning. The behemoth descended into the depths of the monster and attempted to transform into a monster. The captain asked her to wait, but the behemoth replied, "The young man is calling for help." Hans wondered if she was acting furiously for him, obeying instinct. She couldn't believe she was being serious, since she thought she was just like the other AKs. The captain noticed that she was claiming otherwise and announced that she had a plan. The captain frantically addressed the behemoth. If she wanted to save Tojuro, she must do everything exactly as she said. She angrily called her a beast and said she found her disgusting if she was truly capable of thinking about anyone but herself. She looked her in the eyes and said that only now would she bet on her. Behemoth dove underwater and approached the monster. Hans ordered to prepare her technique and struck the underwater monster. The captain warned Tojuro and told them to hold on, as there would be a jolt. The protagonists didn't quite understand what jolt. Behemoth immediately struck the underwater monster. The monster howled and spat out the victims, the exorcists from the shore noticing how powerful the body blow was. Ursi prepared her technique and attacked the monster, causing it to be severely electrocuted. Behemoth saw the protagonist washed ashore and shouted, "Saved! Everyone's alive! Thank God!" She looked at him with a sweet face, extended her hand, and hugged him, glad he was safe. The captain looked at the hug with jealousy and felt sad. MC remembered the monster and asked, "What about the sea serpent?" He approached it closer and realized it was still alive, but he didn't know what to do with it. Ursi noted that he couldn't just let something like this go. It was too dangerous. Collateral asked, "So we just destroy it?" The protagonist silently looked at the monster and considered it. He lowered his head and quietly said, "I don't want to kill it," and asked if there was another way. Collateral grinned and noted that it had started again. Buns stood to the side, silently wondering what that thing that looked like a mark was. She couldn't understand because this mark gave control over Ike, although this was previously impossible, and it also had a strange function. The captain thought that, no matter how you look at it, it was more than just a mark. Behemoth approached the prone underwater monster, placed her hand on it, and told it not to kill, but to neutralize it. The captain watched this from the sidelines, confused. Scar spoke again. "Contact. On contractor's orders, I am beginning to overwrite target parameters." Hunts watched angrily, unable to comprehend what was happening. The scar on the behemoth's finger revealed that it was an ancient species that had survived into their time, and put forward a hypothesis. A marine reptile from the dinosaur era still inhabits the ocean. A risk had been detected, and the threat level exceeded the permissible limit. The scar removed the risk it had detected, and put forward a second hypothesis. A hallucination psychological phenomenon that also poses a potential danger to the human brain. The scar removed this danger, and the monster rose up. The protagonist watched in amazement. The behemoth asked the scar, "What remains, and which object will be selected for correction?" The underwater monster swirled in the air and began to transform. It turned into a cute little seal. The scar on the behemoth's finger reported that optimization was complete, transforming it into the least dangerous hypothesis, a seal. The exorcists looked at the cute beast and were delighted.